On the third cold morning of December, I knew the firewood was gone again. The stack beside my garage had been shrinking for weeks, but this time it was obvious. Fresh tire tracks curved through the frost, neat as a signature. Our HOA had rules for everything: mailbox height, grass length, even curtain colors. Yet somehow, Karen ignored them whenever it suited her. She'd already been warned twice for trespassing. Fined once. Politely confronted more times than I could count. Each time, she smiled like nothing applied to her. That morning, though, something snapped. Not rage. Not revenge. Just certainty. I was done being the quiet neighbor. I called the HOA office, logged the theft, and documented the time. Then I set up a small camera facing the driveway. I wasn't planning payback. I wanted undeniable proof. By afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed. One neighbor casually mentioned Karen bragging about free firewood at the mailbox cluster. I nodded and kept my thoughts to myself. When evening fell, frost silvered the yard and the air went sharp. I rest-acked what remained, leaving one odd log right at the edge. It looked ordinary. Heavy. Tempting. The trick wasn't danger, just surprise. A harmless, theatrical pop meant to expose a thief, not hurt anyone. I double-checked everything. Safety mattered. Accountability mattered more. Near midnight, my phone chimed. Motion detected. Headlights swept across the snow. Karen stepped out, confident as ever, wrapped in a smug little victory. She didn't look around. She never did. She bent, grabbed the edge log, and muttered something about selfish neighbors. I watched from inside, calm, steady, heart pounding just enough to remind me this mattered. The moment stretched, quiet and cold. This wasn't really about firewood anymore. It was about boundaries. It was about consequences. And it was about a lesson she never expected to learn. By morning, the entire neighborhood would be talking. Karen dragged the log toward her trunk like she'd done a dozen times before. No hesitation. No guilt. Just routine entitlement. She slammed the trunk shut and climbed into her SUV, already victorious in her mind. I watched the tail lights disappear and waited. 5 minutes later, the silence broke. A sharp, harmless bang echoed down the street, loud enough to rattle windows but nothing more. Lights flicked on across the cul-de-sac like dominoes. My phone exploded with notifications. Karen's SUV skidded to a stop halfway down the block, hazard lights blinking wildly. She jumped out, screaming about explosions, sabotage, and lawsuits. Neighbors poured outside in pajamas and coats, confusion thick in the air. Someone called the police. Someone else started filming. Karen stood in the road, flailing, pointing back toward my house, shouting my name like it was a curse. I stepped outside calmly, hands visible, phone recording everything. When the police arrived, Karen launched into a dramatic story about attempted murder and booby traps. She demanded arrests. She demanded apologies. She demanded control. The officers listened patiently, then asked a simple question. Why were you taking someone else's property? Silence hit harder than the bang. I showed the footage. Clear video. Multiple nights. Same pattern. Same thief. Karen's confidence collapsed in real time. Her story shifted. Excuses piled up. The officers explained trespassing laws and theft in plain terms. The harmless device was inspected and deemed exactly that, harmless. Karen, however, was not. She was issued a citation on the spot. The HOA president, who had shown up in slippers, looked furious. Neighbors whispered. Phones stayed raised. Karen tried to laugh it off, but no one joined her. That's when the reality set in. She wasn't the victim. She was exposed. And for the first time since moving into the neighborhood, she had nowhere to hide. The police left. The crowd lingered. Karen drove off in silence. I stood there, cold but steady, knowing something had finally changed. The next morning felt different, like the air itself had shifted. People waved who never had before. Messages poured in from neighbors thanking me for finally doing something. Turns out, Karen hadn't just stolen from me. She'd taken packages, decorations, even plants, all under the assumption no one would challenge her. The HOA emergency meeting that night was packed. Karen sat rigid, arms crossed, jaw tight. Video evidence played on a projector, every theft time-stamped and undeniable. Excuses didn't land anymore. The board voted unanimously. Fines increased. Privileges revoked. Probation enforced. Karen's reign of intimidation ended with paperwork and public accountability. She tried to interrupt, to argue technicalities, but the room stayed quiet. No one defended her. After the meeting, she avoided eye contact, slipping out early. Outside, neighbors laughed softly, relief mixing with disbelief. The story spread online faster than anyone expected. Clips went viral. Comment sections filled with similar stories from other HOAs. Karen became a symbol of unchecked entitlement finally meeting consequences. I didn't celebrate. I just slept better. The firewood stayed untouched. Packages stopped disappearing. The neighborhood felt like a community again instead of a battlefield. Sometimes justice isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just exposure. And sometimes, it takes one loud moment to break a long pattern of silence. Weeks passed, and winter settled in quietly. Karen kept to herself, curtains drawn, driveway empty. The HOA updated policies, cameras went up, and communication improved. Neighbors shared coffee instead of complaints. Looking back, I realized the exploding log wasn't the point. It was a mirror. Karen saw herself reflected in public view, stripped of excuses. Accountability did what arguments never could. I never wanted revenge. I wanted respect. And respect returned when boundaries were enforced. The lesson wasn't about tricks or traps. It was about standing up, documenting truth, and refusing to be bullied by entitlement. The neighborhood learned together. Silence protects bad behavior. Light changes everything. And sometimes, the smallest spark handled responsibly can ignite real change. Spring arrived slowly, melting the last traces of winter and, with it, the tension that once hung over the street. The firewood stack sat untouched, not because it was guarded, but because no one dared cross that line again. Karen still lived 2 houses down, yet it felt like she occupied a different world now. She followed HOA rules to the letter, waved stiffly when required, and never lingered in conversations. The transformation was quiet but undeniable. What surprised me most was how the neighborhood evolved after everything happened. People talked more. Not gossip, real conversations. We shared stories about boundaries we'd failed to defend before. Small things, big things. It turned out Karen's behavior had thrived on our collective silence. Once that broke, something stronger replaced it. Trust. One afternoon, the HOA president stopped by, not with paperwork, but with thanks. He admitted they'd ignored warning signs for years because confronting her felt inconvenient. "You forced us to do our jobs," he said, half embarrassed, half relieved. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who finally refused to be pushed. Online, the video kept circulating. People messaged me from other neighborhoods, asking how to handle similar situations. I told them the same thing every time: document everything, stay safe, stay legal, and don't let fear keep you quiet. Karen never apologized. I didn't need her to. Accountability isn't about remorse, it's about change. And change had happened. The HOA enforced rules evenly now. Complaints were addressed. Transparency replaced favoritism. On warm evenings, kids played outside again without parents hovering anxiously. Packages sat on porches all day without vanishing. The street felt normal, maybe for the first time. One night, as I added a log to the fire, I laughed at how absurd it all seemed. A piece of wood had exposed a pattern years in the making. The explosion everyone talked about wasn't the sound, it was the moment entitlement collided with evidence. That collision reshaped our community. Looking back, I understood something important. Standing up doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means preparing, staying calm, and letting truth speak louder than anger. Karen lost her power the moment we stopped pretending nothing was wrong. And that lesson, unlike Firewood, was something worth sharing. By early summer, the story had settled into neighborhood legend, retold at barbecues and driveway chats with a mix of humor and disbelief. New families moved in and heard a softer version, stripped of drama but rich with meaning. "That's why we lock things down here," someone would say. We learned the hard way. Karen's name rarely came up anymore, which was perhaps the biggest consequence of all. Attention had once fueled her authority. Now, she was invisible. I noticed her one afternoon struggling with grocery bags, hesitating as if deciding whether to ask for help. A neighbor stepped forward and assisted her without comment. No judgment. No triumph. Just basic decency. Karen murmured thanks and hurried inside. That moment stuck with me. Accountability had corrected behavior, but community had softened the aftermath. The HOA implemented a shared watch system, not out of paranoia, but cooperation. Cameras were openly disclosed. Rules were simplified and applied evenly. Meetings became shorter, calmer, productive. People trusted the process because they'd seen it work. I received an email from a local news producer asking to feature the story. I declined. The point wasn't fame. It was resolution. Online attention faded eventually, as it always does, but the changes remained. One evening, sitting on the porch, I realized how much energy we'd all wasted tolerating what felt uncomfortable. Avoidance had cost us peace. Confrontation, done responsibly, restored it. The lesson wasn't about cleverness or traps. It was about courage paired with restraint. Karen had crossed lines because no one stopped her. When that changed, everything else followed. I never set out to be an example, but people learn from what we tolerate. Kids watched how adults handled conflict. They saw calm over chaos. Evidence over accusation. Process over impulse. That mattered more than any viral clip. As summer nights stretched longer, laughter replaced whispers. The street lights came on, bikes lined driveways, and doors stayed unlocked a little longer. Karen still lived among us, but without fear or favoritism attached to her presence. She was just another neighbor now, bound by the same expectations as everyone else. And maybe that was the real ending. Not humiliation. Not revenge. Just balance restored. The firewood burned steadily, warming the house, a quiet reminder that even small resources deserve respect. When people ask me what finally worked, I tell them the truth. I stopped accepting excuses and started insisting on fairness. Nothing exploded that night except an illusion of entitlement. And once that shattered, there was room for something better to grow. Autumn returned almost unnoticed, leaves collecting along the curb where Karen's SUV once idled during her nightly shopping trips. The season change brought reflection more than tension. I realized how easily one person's behavior had shaped the emotional climate of an entire street. Fear had been subtle, almost polite, disguised as patience and neighborly tolerance. We'd called it keeping the peace, but it was really avoidance. Now, peace felt different. It wasn't fragile. It didn't rely on silence. It held weight. One evening, a new dispute surfaced between two neighbors over a property line. In the past, everyone would have watched quietly, hoping it blew over. This time, the HOA stepped in immediately. Measurements were taken. Documentation reviewed. A fair decision reached. No drama. No resentment. I watched it unfold and understood how much we'd changed. Systems work when people trust them, and trust grows when rules are enforced consistently. Karen attended that meeting too. She didn't speak much, but she listened. That alone marked progress. Afterward, she approached me outside. The moment felt surreal, like a scene cut from a different story. She didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She simply said, "I didn't think anyone would ever stop me." Then she walked away. I stood there, surprised by how little emotion the exchange stirred. Anger had burned out long ago, replaced by clarity. Her words confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Power thrives in unchecked spaces. It dissolves the moment boundaries appear. As days shortened, I found myself more engaged with the neighborhood than ever before. Shared projects emerged. A community garden. Holiday planning. Even disagreements felt manageable now, because they happened in daylight instead of whispers. The exploding log story resurfaced occasionally, usually with laughter, but its meaning ran deeper than entertainment. It became shorthand for standing up without becoming cruel. For confronting problems without becoming one. That balance mattered. I noticed Karen volunteering once, quietly helping set up chairs for an event. No one commented. No one mocked. Growth doesn't need an audience. It just needs space. Watching that, I realized something else had shifted inside me too. I was less hesitant elsewhere in life. More willing to speak up, to document, to trust facts over fear. One moment of resolve had rippled outward in ways I never expected. The firewood stack grew again for winter, untouched and unremarkable. And that was the point. When boundaries are respected, nothing needs to explode. Things can simply exist, peacefully, as they should. Winter returned for the second time since everything changed, quieter than before. Snow fell without drama, settling evenly across rooftops and sidewalks, no longer hiding tension beneath its surface. The firewood stack stood full, ordinary, uninteresting, exactly how I wanted it. Neighbors passed by without suspicion, borrowing tools, returning them, trusting one another again. The street had learned a rhythm built on fairness instead of fear. One evening, the HOA hosted a holiday gathering in the cul-de-sac. Lights hung from trees, music played softly, and laughter carried farther than complaints ever had. Karen attended, standing near the edge at first, uncertain. No one confronted her. No one excluded her. Over time, she relaxed, joining a conversation about weather and school schedules. Normalcy proved more powerful than punishment. I realized then that consequences don't need cruelty to be effective. They just need consistency. The rules that once felt oppressive now felt protective because they applied to everyone. I spoke briefly at the gathering, not about the incident, but about community responsibility. People nodded, understanding the subtext without needing details. Later that night, as the fire crackled inside, I reflected on how close we'd come to letting resentment define us. The explosion could have escalated into hostility, lawsuits, endless grudges. Instead, restraint kept it contained. Evidence replaced emotion. Process replaced impulse. That choice mattered. I received fewer messages online now, but the ones that came were thoughtful. People said they'd started documenting issues, attending meetings, asking questions instead of venting. Change spread quietly, neighbor by neighbor. Karen kept her distance, but she followed the rules, paid dues on time, and stopped testing limits. That was enough. Forgiveness wasn't required for progress. Respect was. As winter nights lengthened, I understood the story was never about a difficult neighbor. It was about what happens when ordinary people decide not to tolerate small wrongs before they become permanent. Accountability isn't dramatic in the long run. It's steady. It's boring. And that's exactly why it works. The fire burned low, steady, and warm, and outside, the street rested, balanced at last. Looking ahead, I know challenges will surface again, because communities are built from imperfect people. What changed is our response. We talk sooner. We document calmly. We act together. That shared approach creates safety without suspicion. When conflict appears, it meets structure, not silence. I keep the cameras stored away now, unused but ready, a reminder rather than a threat. Preparedness doesn't mean hostility. It means respect for reality. If another line is crossed someday, it will be handled the same way, clearly, legally, collectively. No theatrics required. The lesson remains simple and lasting. Boundaries, once enforced, allow trust to grow naturally. Over time, ordinary days become proof that fairness outlasts fear for everyone involved. Another year passed, and the story finally settled into memory instead of momentum. It became something we referenced lightly, not as a warning, but as context for how our neighborhood learned to correct itself. New residents arrived, unaware of the tension that once defined the street. They inherited a calmer place because others had chosen to confront discomfort instead of avoiding it. I noticed how quickly problems were addressed now. A broken fence. A noise complaint. A misunderstanding over parking. None of them escalated, because no one assumed silence was the solution anymore. Karen remained part of the picture, but not the focus. She lived within the rules and within herself, quieter, measured, predictable. That predictability was not dull. It was reassuring. One afternoon, while stacking fresh firewood, I caught myself smiling at how uneventful the moment felt. Peace rarely announces itself. It just shows up consistently. I thought back to the night everything changed and realized the most important decision hadn't been the setup or the documentation. It had been refusing to back down once the truth was visible. That choice carried forward. It influenced how I handled work conflicts, family disagreements, even friendships. Calm firmness traveled well. Neighbors began mentoring new HOA board members, passing along lessons learned the hard way. Transparency stayed non-negotiable. Rules stayed written. Exceptions stayed rare. That structure protected everyone, including those who once resisted it. During the final HOA meeting of the year, someone joked about the log incident, and the room laughed without etch. Humor meant healing had happened. Afterward, Karen nodded at me in passing. Not gratitude. Not resentment. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. Walking home, I understood closure doesn't always look like apologies or confessions. Sometimes it looks like changed behavior sustained over time. The fire burned that night as it always did, steady and controlled, warming the house without spectacle. Outside, the street lights glowed over quiet sidewalks, unbothered and safe. If there was a moral worth keeping, it was simple. Boundaries protect communities. Evidence protects truth. And courage, when paired with restraint, creates lasting peace. Nothing needed to explode again. The lesson had already done its work. I sometimes think about how easily this could have gone differently, louder, angrier, messy. Choosing patience didn't mean choosing weakness. It meant choosing outcomes that lasted. The neighborhood now carries that instinct forward, correcting early, listening longer, documenting clearly. That shared discipline feels invisible most days, yet it shapes everything. Children learn it by watching. Adults rely on it without naming it. Stability grows from repetition, not drama. When visitors ask why things feel so calm here, We shrug and say it just works. The truth is simpler. We decided fairness mattered more than comfort, and we kept deciding it again. Daily.